Hey guys, Mestre Pena here with Graduada Cegonha from the Capoeira Connection Podcast, and we're back with episode number 8. In this episode, we take a trip down to San Antonio, Texas to visit Instrutor Montanha and Graduada Cegonha of Capoeira Luanda. For me personally, this has been a long-awaited episode because I've known Montanha for well over 15 years, and he's always been a shining example of not only a great capoeirista, but also a community leader and someone who's dedicated a large portion of his life to supporting this amazing art. So once again, we hope that you enjoy this episode, and it's also available on iTunes, YouTube, and capoeiraconnection.com. Thanks, guys. This is awesome. So this is our first podcast on the road. We're here in San Antonio, Capoeira Luanda World Headquarters.
World, I don't know.
We're here with Instrutor Montanha, certo?
Yes, sir.
And Graduada Cegonha, our very first female presence on the podcast.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Awesome. Man, so starting out, I always have a hard time like what to even start with, especially with you, because I've wanted to have you on the podcast for a long time. But once we get going, it'll probably be hard to stop. But I wanted to first tell us a little bit about what you guys have going on here in San Antonio currently, as far as like the classes you offer. And you guys are in a great position where you have your own space. I assume you can come here anytime you want, so it's not just during class time. So you guys can host like events here. We're here for the end of the year Roda 2018, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what do you guys got going on?
Well, that's a big advantage because we are also a performance group. The group Capoeira Luanda here was founded under the umbrella of Ile Bahia de San Antonio, which is a nonprofit organization that sponsors educational and arts programs for the Afro-Brazilian arts. And it was founded in collaboration with the Carver Center. Mestre Vieira founded this in 1992 with the vision of having a performance group as well as capoeira, but offer samba, maculele, maracatu, frevo, pagode, puxada de rede, etc. So having our own space allows us to store instruments, which before we had to, transport back and forth and kind of rely on the same people to have the burden of bringing things and being at everything. And we can come here and kind of rehearse and knock around and practice and, whenever we want, do music or work on little things that are going to add to our show value as well.
Yeah. So originally the nonprofit was set up in 92.
Yes.
By Mestre Jalon.
Mestre Jalon.
That's really cool because when we had Contra Mestre Gringo on here also, he talked about they have a really good nonprofit organization going on, but those are two separate entities, right?
The Brazilian Arts Foundation is a separate entity. Gringo actually, in his early times in Capoeira, before he was under Mestre Jalon, used to come down and visit like every weekend. Like it was, insane. He would come down here and visit when Lalo was here, when Esquilo was here, and train. And he was always like around, almost like a member of our own group. And, it made it an easy transition once he came under Mestre Jalon. But I think he saw the way the nonprofit worked and, took some of the ideas that we had going on here, and he really, really expanded and ran with it. He had a great, strong vision in Houston.
Yeah.
And Houston had so much opportunity, with, large number of people, but maybe not the same amount of capoeira in that same space. And so much room for growth. And when you go to the Brazilian Arts Foundation, you can really see, and feel what the guy had,
sure.
in his mind.
Does the nonprofit, does that assist you in holding down a physical location? Do you get support from the city for like this place, or is this self-funded by you guys? And
this is funded by us. There were the nonprofit provides us educational programs and kind of gives income streams to instructors who are out teaching in the local community, and it connects us with a lot of other organizations. At one point in time, grant money was funding. Because we were in collaboration with Carver, we had no overhead because we were working in their space. And then the grant money was used for other things, costuming, instruments, et cetera, and also to pay the instructors. There were grants that we got through the Texas Commission of the Arts and a few other places, but some of those things have since kind of dried up. 21st Century provided us with a lot of opportunities to provide educational programming in capoeira throughout San Antonio, which is actually sort of how I got introduced to capoeira here.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
man!
Yeah.
The whole idea behind the nonprofit and helping run like cultural arts through that, and in conjunction with capoeira, it's really interesting because I think it's like an idea that a lot of people have, but they don't necessarily know how to even utilize a nonprofit or what it's for, and that's kind of like I wanted to educate other people because I'm sure there's people in smaller groups that are very localized, like within their community and government, and they can probably use this information to help kind of like start that. So from my understanding, a nonprofit kind of works like it's an entity that helps you get grants or funding from the city. And then with that, like you were saying, you can allocate that to pay instructors or pay yourself or to invest in instruments or something like that through grants. Right?
Yes, and it also promotes the art, promotes the group, and brings people into the group. A lot of the educational programs that we have on the outside have kind of fed the local programming we have here that goes through runs basically from the students' tuition.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and in order to set that up, do you know much about do you guys have a committee or a board?
Yes.
Like a president, vice president, treasurer.
Yes.
Run through kind of like who's on the board or how that works.
Geloso is the current board president, which it's I look back, I laugh. I served as the president for 11 years, but it was kind of because the cart was in motion, and they dropped the the reins.
Yeah,
and
it's just like jump on it, right?
Yeah, kind of had to jump on and hold on to that until the group stabilized. But Geloso is the board president. Our treasurer is Gia, and Coquero and Pacochi are also board members, active board members. Lashika is also the board secretary, but she's moved away. So she lives, distance is kind of prohibitive as far as her participation.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
And is that like is that a day-to-day thing to keep up with? To just kind of see like, all right, well, I imagine you guys probably set up like goals and milestones to try to hit for...
Certainly each, and it's funny, we talk about the end of the year roda, and one thing that I talk about a lot with my students is like certain milestones, and that a capoeirista is always in a process of evaluating where they are as far as with goals or with meeting certain things. And some people, they only do that once a year. It's a sad thing to me that they choose, one time a year to do it, but we do it after every single roda. You're wondering, what could I do differently, or what's under my control that I could change that would make things better for me, my outcomes better. And so as a board, as an organization, we do the same thing, we go from event to event, Bachsaro to, when I say event, we perform at the Texas Folklife Festival. We do the Carver Youth Matinee. We do the Texas State Fair. We do a number of other yearly events where we have to have a lot of moving parts and a lot of rehearsal time to get shows and things like that organized, and also keep the training component and keep all of that going at the same time. And so, do
you guys have a group of people that are like exclusive for doing shows? You're like, this is at least we have this group of like 8 people, and then everyone else is welcome, but you always know you have like a...
That is
is that ideal?
That's the ideal. That's the ultimate goal. For community shows and things that we do for other nonprofit organizations, it's just everybody goes and we make a roda. If it's a long show, we might do makulele informally, and we always have something kind of prepared that we can do to put on. But for more formal shows, like what was it we did for the veterans, it was the federal employees in Houston.
Oh yes.
I can't remember it was there.
It was like the
what was there was some event that they hosted there in Houston, and actually I have a cousin who's on their board.
It was
He
like
called
a Labor Day thing.
Yeah, because they were doing a carnival theme, and they wanted like the Brazilian theme. They had a samba group from Houston and some other things, but they wanted capoeira there, so he called me there, and we did something a bit more formal. So we put together each year in our performance season, we put together the Carver Matinee is an hour-long show. So it has a lot of stuff. And actually today we're going to rehearse a little bit after the Roda. So you'll see a little piece of what we have. And those who were at Bachado saw the Makulele that we had from the previous season. So each season, that show carries from one to the other. We just either condense it or expand it depending on the venue and depending on the amount of time that they need. Mm-hmm. And then the following year we come up with a new plan, and we might borrow from ourselves, or we might
was the organization, did it have any connection to Mestre Gelon's Dance Brazil?
Yes, which I think it was kind of also a part of his initial vision. He wanted to have a capoeira group, but he also wanted to do the dance component and the music component. So that all the pieces came together. And Ile Bahia, for a long time, was, those three components. You had some who were just musicians, some who were just capoeiristas, some who were just dancers, and then also the cross-pollination, some who did a little bit of all of those. And there was a rift, I want to say, in the late 90s that kind of caused and I think it was just transitional. Going from Lalo's leadership, Professor Lalo at the time, who's now Mestre Lalo, to Esquilo's leadership, there was an adjustment period, and there were some who were very loyal to what Lalo did and et cetera, and so it kind of caused splinters, and some people went their own way, and
right.
But I think we're kind of back to where we were, and pretty close to all the way, back from those times to the original mission and goal of Ile Bahia de San Antonio.
Yeah.
Do you guys have to, is there like a requirement to do shows for the nonprofit, like a year?
You have to have a uniform.
No, I meant more like you have to do like a certain amount of shows to be get funding from the government.
To get funding, for grants like what we had with the Commission of the Arts, we had to show proof that we were doing this. But what really helps is we get letters of collaboration from other nonprofits that we do events for, and so those letters of collaboration go in our portfolio and show that we're working.
It's like validation, right?
Yeah, with the other organizations in existence here.
That's really cool.
And who or what? I mean, do y'all still write grants now?
It's been a while since we've operated from grants. We had some grant writers at the Carver, and also I don't know if you guys knew Olivia Durgi. She was on our board, but she moved first to Europe, and now she's actually living in Austin. She's married and with children, family, the whole nine in Austin. But she was the last steady grant writer that we had that was kind of keeping things afloat.
Yeah, because that takes quite a bit of work to make sure you're always writing, putting them in, submitting it, and getting it.
And we send each year, and when I say grant writing, I'm talking about program grants. But each year we do still apply for funding and things like that from sources for our bachillerato to help with transporting mestres, airfare, and things like that. The difficulty is that a lot of the grants, because they're locally, have to be spent locally. So we have to find creative ways to use those funds for the things that we only have here, and then allocate the funds that we raise from tuition for travel expenses, et cetera.
Yeah, because when you get a grant, you have to spend all of the grant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting, but that's that's a great revenue stream, right? If you really want to dive into capoeira as a profession, it's almost like a no-brainer that you should make a push towards some kind of nonprofit organization.
It takes away a lot of the overhead, and actually sometimes it's even difficult to spend all the money. I remember one event we had in 2003. where we hosted the event at Sunset Station. And we kind of went all out that year. We had a grant from the Alice Clayburgh Foundation. And all of it, of course, had to be spent locally. So we couldn't use any of it for airfare or for, so we had to, find ways around it. But, it was actually tough trying to allocate all the funds to spend everything that we had gotten.
Yeah, and if you don't spend it all, you don't get as much the next year.
No,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I think it might even you might not even be able to apply.
Yeah, you can forfeit a grant.
the grant.
Mm-hmm. There was a residency that they were going to do for Mestre Jo. She was professora at the time. It was years ago at the Carver, and it was kind of when we were between boards, and the ball got dropped. No one ever picked it up, and they never spent that money. And we weren't able to apply for that again. But it would have been something where we would have been able to bring in artists for, 2-3 months at a time and pay for their residency.
Wow.
Were you permanently barred?
I don't know how long the bar is from, but I know, it's
It's hard to get back into
it's gonna be
the
very
loop, right?
difficult to get back into under the same name anyway.
So around 92 was when the nonprofit was founded, but I want to get into the timeline of you guys starting capoeira, but I want to start back with Lalo also, because that's back. I guess I can relate to that because that's back when I first knew about capoeira here. I came for a batizado when I was really young. I don't even remember where it was. I think it was in a fire station. And I was like, oh, this is just like the movie, and go through kind of the leaders or organizers over the years of Capoeira Luanda here. It was passed down from Lalo to who to and then it comes to you.
Well, I think the original seed was planted by Mestre back in the 80s. The Carver brought him down to with the group he was touring with, and I'm not sure.
And you're talking about Mestre Jalon,
Mestre
right?
Jalon, yes. I'm not sure they were even called Dance Brazil then.
Okay.
But they came and performed at the Carver. Joe Long was the director at the Carver, and she brought them there. And now the auditorium is named the Joe Long Auditorium.
Oh, wow.
So, so they performed there, and some years later, they brought him for a residency. They brought him for maybe a 6-month period, and he wanted to kind of gauge interest in capoeira in South Texas, Central Texas. And during the time he was here, he got so much positive feedback that he sent Lalo to teach, Professor Lalo at the time. And so that was, I want to say, the end of 92, beginning of 93, maybe February of 93, somewhere around there. I hadn't started capoeira yet. Capoeira was kind of chasing me at that time. I went to school in Connecticut, and it's funny. I remember there being events at the Black Student Union, and I had some friends that came back, and I had never heard of capoeira, and they were telling me about this African martial art, and the kicks were so sweet, and they did these foot sweeps, and it was so cool, and they were so acrobatic, and they were telling me all this kind of stuff. And at the time, it's so weird, I guess, how things happen. I kind of had this beef with the president of the Black Student Union. We weren't seeing eye to eye. And so I kind of avoided that place, but my friends came back from this show telling me about it. And they were going to the classes, and I went and I saw one, but I didn't hang around, but I was like, that's pretty cool. And at the time I was doing Tai Chi or something else, some other form of martial art. And years later, I come to find out it was Mestre Jalon that was doing those.
Full circle.
Yeah, doing that programming there. But so he left Lalo here. Lalo taught until 98. And there was a small transition period when Lalo was moving to Atlanta first, and then to New York, and then to Florida, and then to Paris and back. But his job took him to Atlanta. I believe at the time he was working for, and he was doing
wasn't he an airline mechanic?
Yeah, airline mechanic. Yeah, he was an airline mechanic. And so he went to Atlanta first. But there was a little transition where the orange cords were kind of holding the class just until Skilo got all his paperwork done. And Mestre had asked a few other Capoeiristas to come down here, but there were different difficulties. There were some people who were really interested in being here. I always heard Mestre Minginho's name mentioned, but around that same time, he got a job in Rio and went back to Rio for a while before coming back.
Okay.
And there were a few other names that I used to always hear mentioned to come here, but it didn't quite pan out. And Mestre felt that Esquilo was the most mature of his students, the most ready of his students,
And where was Esquilo at that time?
Esquilo was in Boca do Rio, in Salvador.
Gotcha.
And he was running the classes there. And I don't know if Skilo saw himself as, that, but
like a leader,
a leader to hold his own group.
Right.
But it was kind of go time.
Yeah.
And so they got everything ready for him and sent him over here. And the way I started Capoeira was Lalo had set up a lot of programs in the inner city. He was teaching in the Alazan courts. He was teaching in the Victoria courts, which is how Tartaruga started Capoeira. He was teaching all throughout the east and southeast side of San Antonio in like impoverished areas to people who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to be exposed to this culture.
Right.
And so at the time I was working at a community center on the east side called the Yellow Austin Community Center. I was working for Youth and Family Services. And Ile Bahia came over there with the intent to, because we had a lot of space. We actually had a gymnastics gym. We had a whole bunch of, space where they could train, and they wanted to host classes like in an after school program for the kids in the local area as a part of their, grant funding. They had to provide, so many free classes in the community. And so they were setting Skilo up for this, and they called my boss to see about it. And, of course, I got nominated to kind of promote the class, to recruit kids, to be in charge of it. And all I knew at the time was that it meant I had to be at work 2.5 hours later than usual twice a week.
Perfect.
Yeah, normally I got off at 4. I had to get off at 6:30 and close up the place. And this, if you saw this place, it's in an old school, and it's kind of creepy to be the last one in there locking it up. And I had no idea what this stuff was that they were bringing there. And the video that they showed was, we watched this video of what they were bringing, and the capoeira was the last component in like a 20-minute video. And the first part was like samba recôncavo or some like very traditional older samba, and I was totally like not interested. Yeah. And I didn't even watch to the capoeira part. And so I'm like pissed, And so I show up for the first day of class, and Skilo's there, didn't speak a word of English, and there's 25 kids. Some of them actually were Tartaruga's nieces and nephews who trained capoeira for like a while, but without knowing a lick of English, in minutes, he had like all of these kids captivated. Like they were totally like, and I had never seen it because these are kids that I work with, and you can't get them this excited about anything. Yeah. And I mean, they were just there, and it was so beautiful. Like the movement was so beautiful, and it kind of I recalled like seeing something like that before, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And so I'm there in my work clothes, like, dress shoes and a tie on, like trying to learn, like, what's that you're doing there? And so he invited me to the class, adult class of the Carver, and I've been, doing it ever since. He actually had to go back to Brazil and come back after that, and he was here permanently from maybe about 4 months later, but I started going to the regular class after that. Okay. Another funny aside, and I don't know if Skilo will watch this, but funny little story, is that the first Tuesday of every month, we had a commodities give out at the center. So we had a little food pantry, a cupboard, And we would make these bags of groceries for the homeless, and the homeless would come and pick up, bags of food from us. And so the first day Skilo showed up, he had on like cut off jeans and some Havaianas and a hat pulled all the way down over his, and he's got a tank top on, and it's, and he's walking around with what I presume is a fishing pole. And I'm like, so he comes to the wrong floor. He comes upstairs, and he's kind of wandering around in the hallways, and I see him, and I'm like, "Can I help you, sir?" And he knows no English, so he just kind of smiles like, "Yes," And I was like, "Oh, you must be here for the commodities." And I was like, "Here, come this way." And so I take him downstairs, and I'm packing him a bag with like canned corn and like ramen noodles and oatmeal, and putting all this bag together for him. And then one of the program managers was like, "Oh, no, he's the artist. Like he's the artist. He belongs in this meeting. We're meeting with him today." And I was like, "Oh, sorry." But I don't know if he knows that I was preparing him a bag of groceries.
That's awesome. So he ran Capoeira Luanda, which back then was Capoeira Brazil.
Capoeira Brazil, yes.
For how long here in San Antonio?
He was here from, like I said, he came initially in the summer of '98, and then he had to go back to, I think they had to change his visa from a tourist to a work visa or something like that. But he came back in like December of that same year, and then started teaching permanently like the very beginning of 1999. And he ran the group, I want to say officially until 2006, but between 2004 and 2006, he had like a little modeling career. I don't know if you remember. He was in some magazines and things like that. And so he was back and forth from New York to San Antonio.
Skilo, we got a lot to talk about, buddy. Can't wait to try to get you on here.
Yeah, he was back and forth from New York to San Antonio. So at that time, he had 4 blue cords. Was feijão, tartaruga, gavião, and caranguejo. And Gavião was kind of in transition between here and Denver, and also here in North Carolina. He would and he was also at times going and taking care of the group in Gainesville. He spent some time in Gainesville because he and Alajin were pretty close friends. Okay. And after Alajin passed, and Quinio took over the group, but then Quinio's visa ran up and he had to move back to Brazil, and Borracha was there for a while, but he was in St. Louis also. So in the interim, Gavião was helping out in those different places. So really we had the 3 blue cords here, but Caranguejo was kind of stepping to the forefront. Mm-hmm. So without having the title, he was the instructor. Okay. From that space of about 2005, 2006, and I think Feijão wanted to kind of pursue his own and get his own identity, and so that's when he started the group in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And Tartaruga had some of his own work also here on the west side of town. He had a little space. I remember we had a grand opening. We had a Hada there. I have a story about that too.
Well, maybe we'll get to that next time.
I won't say any names, but it involved your foot and a face and a bloody lip.
Yeah. Yeah. To be young again.
Yeah, it was at Tartaruga's little studio over on the west side.
Yeah, I remember
that. That was right before you went to Brazil, I think.
Yeah, I left in 2007.
Okay. Yeah, it was probably briefly before you went to Brazil. That. So Caranguejo ran the group from that time until I want to say 2010. 2010, 2011-ish. And with the birth of his daughter, he wanted to commit more time to family. Yep. And so he was kind of, in and out. And once again, I grabbed the reins. I didn't have the official title to run the group, but I was teaching probably the majority of the classes. Yeah. And I also had programming at Northwest Vista at that time. which was kind of my way of establishing my own work. In 2006, I started the program over there, and I was kind of using it to prepare students, to get them their foundation so that they could come to the regular class and be like, ready to go to train. But I've been pretty much in charge of the group from 2011 until now.
From 2011 till now, and now it's 2019. So
Going
going on 8 years.
Yeah,
that's a solid chunk of time to devote to this. Especially you work outside of this as well, right?
Yes.
Full-time job.
Yeah, actually a full-time and 2 part-times.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So people who are like, oh, I just don't have the time to get out of here, right?
Yeah, you make it. I sleep while jogging.
Yeah.
He's actually part vampire. He doesn't sleep ever.
So then, Cegonha, when did you and how did you kind of find capoeira? And are you from San Antonio?
I am from everywhere. My dad was in the Army.
Okay,
So
cool.
I have a little bit of everywhere, all of the U.S. in me. But I started in June 2006. And it's... As feminist as I am, the start of my capoeira is not. I was going through a really bad breakup, and I had known Graduada from Austin. Before then, we had fallen out, and I had seen him one day, just fate, and I was like, "Hey, let's hang out." And he's like, "I'm kind of on my way to the gym. I gotta go," and I'm like, "I'll go with you," And he was on his way to a capoeira class,
Cool.
and. It was like I went there that first day. I watched. The next day, I participated, and
that was in San Antonio?
that was here in San Antonio.
In San Antonio?
Yeah, and hadn't stopped since.
And so 2006. Who was teaching at that time?
Karengeju.
That was Karengeju.
Yeah,
Okay.
Karengeju. He was teaching. My first actual class was a workshop. It was during Bachisada week. And it was the first the first workshop, and it was contra Mestre Esquilo was teaching. He was professor at the time, I think, and I got some bad information. They were like, "Just don't tell anybody it's your first day," when obviously it's my first day. These people they'd seen me one day, and I was trying to keep up, and that's actually kind of a funny story because Esquilo came by me and he was like, "How long have you been training?" And I'm like, "Today's my first day." And he was like, "Oh, okay, all right, okay."
Sit in the corner over here.
That makes sense.
Yeah, he was like, "Okay," I had the off, the wrong hand up and doing all this other stuff. It was not good. But he was talking about capoeira chasing you, and I believe capoeira chooses you, and I was really big into musical theater in school, and there was the summer between my 8th grade and freshman year of high school. I did this camp that it was all musical theater, and
Broadway on with the show.
It's called Broadway on with the show, and I was so into this. It's so dramatic, and they had the last day we were there, they had this group entertainment, and nobody was really watching. We're all sitting there. It has nothing to do with musical theater. Where all of us are like, okay, what are we watching here? And it was a martial arts group. It was capoeira, and I took a couple pictures because I was like, some of these guys are kind of cute. And at my parents' house, cleaning out and old room, and so they can make it into a guest room. And I find all these pictures, and I'm looking at them. And I'm like, oh, that kind of looks like Mo. This looks like Quesadilla. These are, and it's I had seen this.
It was us, and I remember that show.
Yeah, 7, 8 years before I started capoeira, or 6 years before I started capoeira, and I'm like, was
that at Edgewood?
It was at Edgewood.
Yeah,
Edgewood High School.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild to look back and be like, oh man.
Yeah.
I can still
I knew you guys before y'all knew me.
And it's funny, I guess time because that was how many years ago?
That was 99, 2000?
99, somewhere around there. And I still remember a conversation that Coquetto and I were having while we were warming up backstage in the little warm-up room.
Yeah.
It's just
It was just to find those pictures and this, it it truly, I think, was fate, for all of that, to happen, and for me and Pidgeotto to, reconnect at that time, and it just happened to be, it's Capoeira is.
And that was 2006?
Yeah, when I started.
2006, going on 12, 13 years?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Wow, man, time flies.
Yeah.
And so you've trained pretty consistently with Capoeira Luanda since then, right?
Yeah.
Straight through?
Mm-hmm.
What was I going to say? At that time, so you have about 13 years of lifetime in Capoeira.
Mm-hmm.
Are there many other women in your group that have the same timeline, or I guess like, just like length of time in Capoeira and training? And
so when I started, it was sort of on the endings of cutting, like the start of the end of cutting Geju's reign, and there was not very many people to start with. I was the only beginner in a lot of classes.
Okay.
So there's not really people in my line. I think I only have like one other line mate, and he kind of dropped off.
Yeah.
So he's like an orange cord right now.
Yeah.
But they're really, the women that were around, there's only one left, and it's Cegonha.
Yeah.
And she has probably 5-6 years on me. But that was, I don't know, that's sort of like a touchy subject to me, because there was, when I started, there wasn't that like strong women there. So a lot of, when I was watching the guys, know, and it got to a point where I was like, okay, well, I'm never going to be as strong as they are, but maybe I could be faster, or maybe I could do this, or, so.
Well, and I think life has taken, because Elashika was pretty steady for, let's see, she started training, I want to say in 2000. And she trained up until, family, children, that kind of thing moved her way. Sereia, we had before. Sereia was a strong presence in Cigana and Samambaya, also in the group that trained for long periods of time. But, Samambaya passed away 2 years ago, two summers ago. Cigana.
Due to what? I'm sorry? Her passing?
She had cancer.
Okay.
Yeah. Cigana moved to Germany. Her husband, Bigogino, was in the Air Force. And now they're back in San Antonio, but they live like way out in Medina, and they have 2 kids. And Sereia's in Fresno. So we had, strong female presence, but, as with a lot of students, life kind of pulls you here and there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I feel like even with you guys, it was very similar to like our group as well. For a while, we had like a thick crew of like blue, yellow cordas, like guys who were just getting ready to be graduado. And there was Zumbi, Sorriso, Mortadela, Salsicha, Caveira, Menino. There was like a group of people, right? And that was like, there'd been 10 years put into these dudes, something like that. And then through like the transition and like Messi Rodrigo moving back to Brazil and Messi Fran coming in here, and just everything kind of getting diluted or I don't know, like life happens and spreads out. And then it's like you look back and you're like, wow, I'm one of the only ones left from when I started like my crew, and I remember you guys, man, y'all used to always travel in a pack, dude. You would come down as like Tortaruga, you, Gavião, Esquil, like all these dudes, and we're like, dang, it's it was really cool, man, because back then we really only saw like different people once a year, maybe for a batizado, like ours and yours. And for many years, it was just us going back and forth.
In Texas, it was just the 2 groups.
Yeah.
It was just the 2 groups. And you had to, really get out on the road and travel. And I think here, I was kind of one of the first ones that kind of had Skilo told us we had to travel. And I took it very literally. And I was kind of the first ones with the hunger to get out there. I got in a car when Bohasha had his first bachillerato in St. Louis. And I drove 16 hours to St. Louis. We did the bachillerato. I slept for 4 hours and we drove back to San Antonio.
Yeah,
I did the same thing in Gainesville. The first, few years I was in Capoeira, I would drive out and go to Mestre Boneco's event, which is actually how I met Contramestre Versatil.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to take a moment to thank Professor Mascado and Contramestre Versatil for the shout out
Awesome.
on the last episode. I really, really touched me. I was,
Yeah.
very touched by the respect.
Yeah.
But I was at a Hawda in Huntington Beach, and I met him there, and some weirdness kind of happened, and I didn't have a ride back to Los Angeles. And this guy that I'm meeting for the first time on that day was like, yeah, you could ride with me, and so we drove back to LA and talked and, chatted it up on the way. And I was like, I reach in my wallet to offer him some gas money, and I have a $50 bill and lint. And I was like, I can't part with this $50 bill. And he saw like the conflict in my face that I wanted to, and he was kind of like, hey man, look, whenever I'm in your neck of the woods, pay it forward, pay it back or whatever. And I never forgot that, I've always kept that, little bit of kindness from 20 years ago, that little act of just giving me a ride. He was headed back to LA, but I'm sure not, LA's really big,
Right.
not where I was headed, but I've never forgotten that Versatil.
So going back and talking about just like time in capoeira, like one thing that always kind of starts making its thing like more present is the idea of responsibility, right? And I mean, you guys have pretty much, I say you guys because I still don't know like the story of like the responsibility that you two hold with the group. So let's kind of get into that a little bit. I mean, you guys pretty much seem to always be running it together, doing something. I mean, we showed up here and we're like, you guys got cooking the food like for after the holiday and things like that. But tell us a little bit about, I guess like from your perspective, what it's like to just like, was responsibility something that you looked for, or was it just like someone needs to do this and you make your way into it? Did someone say, hey, you have to do this in order to move up in capoeira?
Well, so
Go ahead.
there's it's gonna sound very biased, but I think that we've had, because of the transition with Caranguejo to Montanha, there's sort of, I think a lot of us saw Montanha picking up the reins and doing a lot of stuff in the studio. And when that transition happened, I don't think the group was in the best of places. And I think that a lot of people saw the struggle that he was going through and like with holding us together and how much like that took, that a lot of people wanted to help out and they wanted to sort of pick it up and say, what can I do to help? How can I help the studio? And I think because he modeled it, I think a lot of people have wanted to sort of be there and they see the responsibility, and because all of us have full-time jobs, we can't, we would love to have capoeira as a profession,
Sure.
But there's sometimes, it's easier for us to spread out the responsibility. He is always our leader, right? He's always at the top of the pyramid, but I think in a lot of ways, like we're very much partners in some things where he'll always ask for opinions and say, okay, well, do you prefer this, or how does this look, or something like that. So I mean, I think we have a really good team.
Yeah,
that
we do, and I value team, and thank you for that.
Yeah, that's really important, man.
One thing that I just talked about with my class on Thursday night is responsibility, and very literally, when you break down the word responsibility, it's your ability to respond, and and so it's not just taking what's done, but taking what's done to your ability. So if you have the ability to go beyond what was done prior to you, why not? Why not push that limit? Why not see where you can go with it? Mm-hmm. I was always told that, responsibility was a part of capoeira, and Mestre Jalon holds very strongly that capoeira is about the development of the individual, that to be a good capoeirista, you have to be a good person. You have to master yourself. You have to, and so I always took that very seriously. And I was at times in a role where that was very difficult, because I was kind of the second in command, where if something wasn't being done and I didn't take care of it, it's like he's not stepping up. But then when I do take care of it, he's overstepping his boundary,
Yeah.
you know, like that's not in his title to do.
Right.
And so it was a very tricky place to be. And I understand, you know, Geloso's plight, because now he's kind of my in that same spot for me. And I have these conversations all the time with Instructor Feijão, because he's kind of in that same place. It's kind of a tough place, and you see in a lot of places, you wonder why, this contramestre left the group at contramestre, or at this, you know, and it's because it's a very tricky spot to navigate, you know, to be in that position. But I do feel like I had a vision for what the group should be, what it should look like. I had a passion for what I wanted to create and the way I wanted to do it. And so I never look at it as work, you know. It's something, I come to the studio, I'm here 5-6 times out of the week. And there are times that, yes, I have other obligations or things that are kind of tugging at me, but there's nowhere I would rather be than right here.
Yeah.
And I think my students kind of can feel that too. You know, I do have other things outside, you know, like I said, I have a full-time job. And sometimes in that job, I'm a counselor at an alternative high school primarily, but I also coach the basketball team. And so the basketball schedule, you know, they put games that are sometimes inconvenient to our class times.
Yeah.
And
How dare they?
you know, but I also have a passion for my work with those boys, because I see them sort of as the same venue, you know, using a discipline, using an art to better your circumstance to learn about life, because there's so many life lessons that, you know, the same way capoeira mirrors life, basketball has a lot of things that it can teach you about, you know, how to live or how to make decisions.
Well, it seems like for a long time, you've been put in like whether you wanted to or not, like a leadership role. And the capoeira is just like another outlet for that quality of you. You know, like if I were to at least from my experience with you, just say like one word, it would be like leadership would be a good quality, right? And it seems to run true in many other facets of your life. And so that's cool for other people to see that, you know, you do things outside with like the basketball in the school, and you have done other things like that. And it, you know, one thing that I think it was Moscado in the last podcast, he mentioned, he's like, man, Montanha is one of those dudes who's been around forever and everyone knows him. He's like, and he's an instructor, right? And I don't know what it takes to move up in y'all's group. Every mastering group has like a different, I guess, milestones or expectations or whatever it is. But it is good to note that, the community as a whole sees you in a leadership position. And I don't think corda or title makes much difference to that. And by that, I mean this. Like, there was one day where I was talking to Contramestre Esquilo. And I was like, man, we hung out for on New Year's Eve last year. And we went and got some pizza before. And I was like, you know, it's incredible that, you know, the foundation that Mestre Jalon has laid out. And Contramestre Esquilo is like one of his top kind of tiers. And then it breaks off from there. And I was like, but, you know, to be honest, like, Mestre Jalon is like, he's the man, right? But I don't relate as much to Mestre Jalon as I do to Esquilo. And so I've gotten way more personally from Contramestre Esquilo than I have from Mestre Jalon, although Mestre Jalon is like incredible, but it's more relatable. And I could imagine that your students probably have a similar feeling as far as it's like, you may not be the mastery, but you're their teacher. And the teacher doesn't have like a ranking system. Like, you are what the mastery is outside the presence of him. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me in many ways, because I try to model a lot of my decisions off of what I know from Mestre Jalon's philosophy and also Contramestre Esquilo's philosophy. I tried to, the very first thing I tried to do in teaching and taking over, because a lot of it I had to kind of figure out on my own, on the way. But I took all of the things that I loved, enjoyed, or felt were the most beneficial and tried to sift out the things that, and then over time you kind of find that some of those things you sifted out were important too. So you might mix them back in, but many of the elements of what I try to model, come directly from, Mestre Jalon contra Mestre Esquilo.
Yeah.
Well,
you look like you're exploding.
Because here's the thing, like he is sort of, like there's a little bit of Mestre in all of the teachers,
Sure.
right? And I think that Montanha took the very intellectual part of capoeira and like of Mestre, because there's so much studying that like he does, and because like Brazilians start capoeira as children,
Right.
And a lot of us as Americans, we start, or from United States, not Americans, right? We're all Americans, but the like he knows how to teach capoeira to adults, because he can understand the adult body, and he knows like there's so many things like in stretching, and there's one thing that I've learned from him is that there is a difference between somebody whose body can't understand the movement and whose mind doesn't understand it. I can explain this to you as many times as I can, but if your body isn't ready for this movement yet, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's like he's done a lot of work and studying and can identify, oh, okay, this is somebody whose body isn't ready yet. And we do so much stretching and so much warm up to get the body ready for capoeira as adults.
Yeah.
Then, and like he's really like thought that, and like going and training other places, we've had people come back and they're like, people take this class for granted. They don't, like our classes are 2 hours long, and they're like, we go somewhere for an hour, we warm up for 2 or 3 minutes running around the studio, and like everybody's hurt.
Yeah.
We have very low rate of injury here because we do so much, and that's because of him like studying what the adult body can do. And
Yeah.
like nobody cooks as good as your mom, right? So like starting capoeira with caranguejo and montanha, like go somewhere else, and I'm like, yeah, like I really like this mestre, I really like this contramestre in his game, and I really like this movement, but I'm ready to go home.
Yeah.
I want to train at home again.
Yeah. You touched on something that's kind of interesting to talk about too, is the teaching capoeira to estrangeiros, right? Not just Americans, but we call
Right.
it the gringos. And what has it been like to be around so many great, like a lineage of so many great capoeiristas that were 99% Brazilian, and now coming over to you? I mean, have you ever felt like, I don't want to say not equal, but left out from certain things, just culturally, maybe not understanding or the language or something, but like, what's it like being an estrangeiro this high up in capoeira?
And it's funny to frame. First, I wanted to back up a second, because we were talking about responsibility, and one thing that fell onto me even as before I ever had the cord, because you were saying that, and I really appreciate you saying, to recognize and give the respect regardless of the cord.
Sure.
Because I've been some places where they just look at it and, that's that. But long before I had the cord, Esquilo at times would leave me in charge. I remember in my very early stages of capoeira, there was one time he had to travel to a bachillerato in New York, and he left me with the key and in charge of the group, even though I wasn't the highest cord to teach. But he wanted me to open the studio. He wanted me to close, because he knew I was the first one there and the last one out all the time, even as a student. And that kind of ruffled some feathers or caused some conflict, because I was older than I'm a few years older than Tataruga and those guys. They were teenagers and maybe not as level-headed or mature at the time, and so he wanted things run in kind of a certain way. But back it up to let me train the thought back on the track. is that there are cultural references and things like that you're going to miss just because you didn't grow up in that setting. I don't feel like anyone ever, at least not in our group, would consciously exclude you from things for that reason. But there's always going to be kind of a feeling of, trying to catch up. And even among the community outside of Capoeira, there's a stigma. I've been at shows where people have come up to us and like, oh, that is fantastic. Like, it's a great capoeira, great, I haven't seen my ukulele back since I was in, and they're from Brazil. And they say, who here in the group is Brazilian? I said, there are no Brazilians represented here today. And then all of a sudden they just
record stop.
Right.
Yeah, shut down.
Well, and we'll be speaking Portuguese to them, and they ask, what part of, you sound you're from Bahia. What part of Brazil you from? We're like, no, we're from the U.S. Like we're from here, and it's like you can see it turn off, and they're like, wait, no.
Usually, though, that comes from people who aren't capoeiristas.
Yeah.
Because I've met some capoeiristas that didn't know I wasn't Brazilian, and then when they found out I wasn't, they had all the respect to know this person took the time and learned the language
Right.
and learned the music and learned the culture and learned all those things. And so they respect that. But people who are outside of it are just kind of like, will look down their nose at times. But then there are also others who received us well. There was an organization here in town called Cabraça, which was a Brazilian organization of like local citizens, and they would have us perform at all their events, and they were very kind to us and kept a close collaboration with Ile Bahia for several years. Yeah.
And the fruit speaks for itself, right? It's like all your work, it shows that you've put in a lot of time and dedication and work. I remember we were at a show, at an event in Dallas recently, and we were doing Makulele, and you started singing, and then at the end, this other guy comes up to you, he's like, man, I haven't heard those songs in years. And there's another guy who was like, I haven't ever heard these songs. It just really shows that you put in quite a bit of time into. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was Mestre Ninja who said he hadn't heard the songs in a long time.
Yeah, there's definitely like a fine line between practicing and studying, right? It's different. Like you kind of, sometimes some people will gradually make that transition and not even realize that they're not just practicing, they're studying.
Well, and one thing, and I guess with age, I'm not as young and spry as I once was, and so I feel it a lot more important to have the roots, the history, and I think Skilo is of the same mind, and he's shared a lot of good things with me. He's given me books and all kinds of things like that are kind of just leads to where to start.
Yeah.
We actually keep a little library in our studio for the students, so they have access to videos and music, and it's not just capoeira, but other related things that give to the same root, so that they have the opportunity. And one thing, not everybody's going to take an interest in all parts of capoeira because it has so many different facets, but I want the students to at least have the opportunity to be exposed to it.
Right.
And I feel like if I'm not prepared, then I can't give that. If I haven't studied it, I can't give. And there are some things I'm not going to be the expert on, but I want to know at least a little something to be able to kind of guide them in the right direction on it. Otherwise I'm shorting them.
Well, and that's one thing. This is gonna turn into like a Montanha love fest, right? That's one thing that
Good title for the podcast. Episode 8.
there's like that's what's I think great about Montanha and being the leader of Capoeira Luanda San Antonio is because he's not the expert on everything, and he knows that. So there's some things that like I'm choreographing the samba piece that he's like, I'm not gonna do this. I can't.
And
do
I
this,
can give I can give general visual input, but I'm not going to micromanage or give the specifics of it. And I think it's better that way anyway, because it keeps the creativity and the freshness if it's not one person that's doing everything.
He really, I think, like he identifies somebody's strengths and goes like and gives that responsibility to someone, whether they know that it's happening or not. Where he's like, hey, so you get everybody in a line. Like there's some things that he identifies and can put somebody in the right position for, like, that's going to help them in there and sort of keep them around. If you feel important, then you will sort of come back. And I think, like, he's done, and like he's passed it on to like the leadership in San Antonio, is making everybody feel important, so that it doesn't matter if you're at your first chord or if you're a graduado, like there's a job for you.
There's something to contribute.
There is something that you can do to help us. And there's a lot of things that, like, we don't even ask, and people will bring stuff to the studio. You know, like we've got, you know, these really great things that Tiffany made that we didn't even...
the kick bags behind you.
Yeah, the kick bags.
Probably half of those drums.
It's
the
like
Bosu ball that...
It's, people see a need in the studio.
The plyo box.
You know, they see us using our hands as kick pads, and they're like, I'm going to bring some kick pads in, you know? Like, the everybody wants... We're all a part of this. It's very much collaboration.
Well,
you know,
one value that was always stressed to me about capoeira was that of community, you know, and it was modeled to me in so many ways. I remember every single year going to Grupo Senhor de Bonfins, Batizados, and after the bachata, it was sort of a potluck. Everybody brought a dish. There was this one green sauce, and I've never tasted anything like
that.
With the tacos. And I don't know who brought that green sauce, but like you would run out of tacos, and you would dip your hands in this and eat it. It was
After
so
capoeira,
good.
Did you wash your hands?
It was so good. But I remember that, you know, it was always everybody coming together, you know, and I always looked at the group, especially at that time, you know, kind of as a family. You know, there were older brothers and younger brothers, you know, and when I went to Brazil, you know, several trips to Brazil, I always felt that family community from the capoeira group, and I feel like that's something that has to, if you don't know it, it's another element of the culture as a foreigner that you could miss if you don't, you know, if it's not introduced to you in the right way. You know, as a foreigner learning capoeira, you could say, okay, well, the way we do things, it starts at 7, it ends at 9, everybody goes home, you go your separate ways, and just kind of have that. Because I've done other martial arts where it was just that, and I didn't know anyone's name in the class. But when I went to Salvador the first time in 2000, the group is there and everybody knows each other, and outside of class everybody hangs out together, and they have all these common interests outside, and they kind of know each other and know what each other does and their habits and how they are and moods and this and that. And I'm like, that is something that is created, you know, and something that in a place where you don't necessarily have it innately has to be created. And I noticed, you know, early in my capoeira days, like Skilo would always ask everybody, you know, or at least the higher chords, to go out to eat, go out to when we had time. And I kind of always had something else to do, because at that time I was, you know, a bunch of irons on the fire. I was always into a lot of different things. I've lived several different lives, but
told you he's a vampire.
Yep.
Well, once I started to do that and go, and I saw kind of the value of the cohesion of the group, just getting together and doing whatever. And we would, you know, hang out till 2 a.m, doing nothing, you know, but laughing and joking about that day, and how it brought the leadership of the group and everybody closer together. And once you have that bond and people see that within the leadership, that's something they want to be a part of as well. And so it kind of really makes the group grow and grow in a way that's not just in size, but in strength and maturity, that, you know, the small adversities from day to day won't break you apart, because you've got this collective experience. You've got this, you know, these things that you've done together that, you know, made group cohesion. Because capoeira offers enough challenges. You know, there's a lot of adversity within the art itself. And people can get really discouraged, you know, without that. And so I think it's something that's an absolute necessity to have.
So the keeping things together community-wise in your city is one thing. But then, I mean, Capoeira Luanda is a really big group. You guys have a lot of people all over the place, globally, right? And then Esquilo was telling me that not too long ago, I want to say maybe in November or a little before that, you guys had like I guess once a year y'all do like an encounter for the graduados.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hosted in Houston.
Houston. Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that was fascinating to me, and I think like a lot of groups will get something out of hearing how to keep an organization together and a feeling of community by bringing those people together.
I don't have enough words to describe, because the first one we did was in 2016 in New York. But I remember a time, like you said, when there was only 2 capoeira groups in Texas, and then Gringo popped up in Houston. Mm-hmm. And you could, every weekend, especially as a student, when I had the freedom to be away from the academy, more, and didn't have as much programming going on, Gringo was here every weekend.
Yeah.
And every weekend that he wasn't here, we were there, And so you saw each other all the time. And then when there were events, there weren't as many bachasados, because we had St. Louis, Florida, New York, Houston, and here, maybe 5 events a year. You could possibly travel to all, and each one in itself was that reunion. That was the high courts getting together. That was the encounter.
Yeah.
And I remember a time where, all of the professors, contramestres, or at the time instructors, would take each other's classes, would train together, all those things. And that's the kind of thing that needs to happen. So I think this was kind of a throwback to that. The first one in 2016 was to get us all on the same page, as far as how to professionally run your academy. Everybody who's teaching, nomenclature, which Mr. Jalon wanted us all to be on the same page, because capoeira can be very disjointed. We all know what you're talking about. You say esquiva lateral, I say, esquiva de frente. You say, and you show the movement. Oh, okay, we do that, yes, but we call it, descida básica, or whatever you call it. So it was important to get us all on the same page. This last one, and I think the subsequent ones, are just things from a ritual and etiquette standpoint, and history, like things that what I call corporate knowledge. He wants everybody to have kind of a baseline of at least knowing these things at this level, and it's kind of to reaffirm that and to get everybody on that same level. And it was really awesome and reaffirming to me, to be that close to the leadership of the group and to see and understand. For me, character is an important, trait.
Right.
You could be the greatest physical capoeirista in the world, a great singer, but if you don't have the character element, you're failing the art, because you're not able to pass it forward. Our value to the art is our ability to pass it to future generations to help this art survive, because I'm only going to carry it for so many years. You look at a mestre like João Grande, and the expression that comes to my mind, there's an expression that loosely says, a wise man plants trees for which the shade he will never enjoy. And you think of all of the trees that Mestre João Grande has planted, all the seeds that he's put into capoeira. You look at, Mestre Jalon, Mestre Accordion, Mestre Tapuan, Mestre Lua Rasta, all of these great mestres who have contributed such great value and history to the art. And ask yourself, what is my legacy going to be? And for me, it's being able to pay it forward. And I think character, plays a big role in that. Because if you're running people off, if you're, because you're not scrupulous, it's going to be an issue. And that, just a square dealer, And so it was very reaffirming to me to be around the leadership of the organization and to see, okay, these are people who I can put my trust in. Mm-hmm.
Well, another thing also from the Graduados encounter is that there's so many, being titled in capoeira, and especially in class, there's a certain level of character you have to show and of like hardness that you have to have. And that Graduados encounter allowed a lot of us to be students again and to ask questions that, a term that was said there was subject supposed to know. We're supposed to know all of this stuff about capoeira. And if you were, there's some people might be embarrassed to ask the question because I'm supposed to already know this, so it's like, okay, well, let me make a note so I can look it up later, and at the Graduados encounter, there were people that I think maybe just because we train differently in different cities that, things that I knew that because of standards that Montanha has put in place that maybe somebody didn't have, so they're asking questions and I'm like, oh, yeah, I didn't know this. But it was a safe space where a lot of us, we could ask those questions and and allow ourselves to be students and to have that, and I think it's really important to have that in the leadership and just being around there and like having that experience together.
On that, I think at times, and it's one of those things where if you have a lot of exposure to Mestres alone, you can kind of take it for granted. It's I'm sure you've had the experience where maybe something that you say to a student 1 million times and they don't hear it at all, but then Mestre Rodrigo says do that and they're like, mind blown. I've never heard that before.
Mr. Rodrigo said to jingle with your right leg back and right arm up, and it's like
becomes brand new to them. And so I think when they're exposed to Mestre alone all the time, they kind of lose that. And so us who, in my early formation in Capoeira, we got to see him a lot because there were fewer groups. But now every single weekend he's waking up in a different country, in a different state, somewhere, different events. And so it's difficult to have as much time. But when he does come, I really, really value the things that he says. And so I'm listening very, very closely for the clues on this is what we need to know. This is what we need to be training. This is what we need to study. So I try to get all my students at that place. If Mestre says the roda must start with a quadra, then everybody who plays a berimbau, everybody who can hold the gunga is gonna know the quadra, and know how to sing and know how to lead it, so that when we go to the event, we're prepared. We're ready to go. Like we're chomping at the bit. Mestre, said, who here knows a quadra? And my students are jumping out of their seat, to like.
So waiting my whole life for this day.
and I think again a part of that goes back to maybe some of the stigma that you feel, being the outsider and or the non-Brazilian-born capoeirista, is that you want to make sure that that they know you're giving everything that's of importance.
Yeah, for sure.
That you're not skipping steps.
And I brought that up before too because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Capoeira Luanda family, I think of professor and up, I think is it only Gavião who's professor who is estrangeiro?
It's just Gavião.
Just Gavião.
Not Brazilian is what
non-Brazilian
I mean to say, right?
born, yeah.
It's just Gavião. Yeah. So that's is there a reason for that, or is there? Is that just how the cards have kind of fell?
I think it's kind of how the cards have fallen. I firmly believe if Caranguejo would still be training, he'd be professor by now.
Yeah.
I do think that we tend to move a bit slower, and in certain lineages, I think that Mestre believes in moving slow and being, having the fruit be ripe, mature before it goes, and Esquilo is like, if Mestre takes a step, his foot is in the exact same, position. So he believes in, the value of time and patience and everything that extols. And then there have been some things in between that have caused, other things to slow down. I guess just circumstantial, throughout the years. But it's just kind of happened that way. I don't see it as something as like, oh, we've got to suppress this.
Well, and tidbit, right? So Gavião is the only non-Brazilian professor in Capoeira Luanda, and the next highest chord that's like non-Brazilian is Montanha.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
In the U.S., he's
no pressure, big shoes to fill.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's a prestigious thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing also, I do think we tend to move slower, and our chords are important to us, but I think that we've gotten to a level where the only time the color of my chord, right, is really important to me is when I can't play. When they say, "Oh, only instructors and up can play," and I'm like,
So close.
you know, where it's like I want to play, you know, and it's like because I think, you know, in the hall that we're different. I couldn't tell you what your guys' chord system is.
Yeah.
You know, I know it starts with green, I think, but the game
you
is
know
what
the
speaks.
titles. You know the titles, but
Yeah.
you know, but it is the game that
it's the
speaks.
game
yeah.
that speaks. So you know, is that I'd rather let my game speak. You know, and there are some things where I would rather somebody say, "Dang, that's a blue chord. Like that's a graduada. Like she's awesome." You know. Like, or, you know, rather than, "Ooh, that's a graduada," like, you know, like that's where I think that it's needed, you know, like I think people could move faster, but I think that happens everywhere. I think that feeling everybody has a little bit of that, you know?
I don't remember the last chord that I got that I wanted. You're always like, oh man, because with that, like, I don't know how other people feel, but I always feel like a heightened sense of responsibility, and that's a lot of pressure. And it's just like, man, you're never ready until someone like makes you do it, and you're like, you could be ready, but still just not wanna.
Yeah. Well, we should. I'm of the mind that, you know, we train hard, so that when that next chord comes, it's not as heavy, you know, because the chord shouldn't weigh you down, kind of a thing, you know. So it's like if we're, you know, if our cups are overflowing of this chord, you know, when we move to this next chord, we know how to hold that much weight, you know.
Yeah.
To echo what she said earlier, I think the only time chord really affects me in my home, I'm who I am.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I'm the instructor. I have that title. I have that respect. My students give me that respect. When I travel to where people know me, you know, locally here, I've always felt that same respect. I've always felt the respect from Evolução. When I go to, you know, Molejo's events, when I go to Graveto's events, I've always felt that respect. It's when I travel to places where nobody knows me and they only know your title, only know your chord, and they draw the line and say, "Oh, well, only this level and up can baptize, or only this level and up can be on the bateria," and it, you know, it can cost you that, you know, ability to show or do what you do, and you don't maybe show as well. As far as chord goes with wanting it, I was. Put things in perspective, my journey. In the Capoeira Brazil system at the time, red and blue was considered monitor, which was the first title chord. So I was a monitor. I was a monitor for 4 years. When we switched to Capoeira Luanda, I got blue, and blue at that time had no title. Blue didn't get a title until the second year into Capoeira Luanda, which became Graduado, because they were, you know, changing the chord system, adding some things and taking out things, half chords, etc. So I was a graduado. I was graduado for 8 years. And during that time, I had been in the same chord with Caranguejo. I had taught classes. I was running a group. I had classes at Northwest Vista. I had my own work. I had all these things. So I felt like I was ready to be Instructor, to have that title. And it took a long time to get it. And then when I got the title of Instructor, it was only 3 years to the second level. And I think Skilo kind of was like anticipating maybe more of a reaction out of me. But I was like, it's only been 3 years. Like, I can do that on my head, which for a lot of people, 3 years, like in a chord, like, oh, that's a long time. Woe is me. But after having spent 8 years in a chord, you know, I had a totally different outlook, a different perspective, which when you're going through it kind of can suck because it's, you know, when you go a long spell of time and the GPS doesn't tell you, hey, you're still on the right track. You're like, you're not sure if you're going the right direction. Or you're not sure if you're, you know, navigating the correctly or whether you need to turn or what's coming next. And so that's kind of how I felt. But once I got there, it gave me a totally different perspective on on the importance of chord and what it really means, because there comes a point where you're just like, doesn't matter anymore. I'm this chord, but I'm gonna do what I want to do. I'm gonna go and play it in the soda, and if somebody pulls me out, they can pull me out. Whatever. What are you gonna do? Take my chord? So it gave me a totally different outlook on it, and I understand a lot better, from a different vantage point, what the weight does, what that level of patience and humility that you have to gain that. And, when I look at Contramestre Skilo, it's something that he models as well. Yeah.
When he got the chord, like I had a dream like 2 weeks before, and I was like, I had this dream. I said, I don't want to tell you about it because you're going to say, no, that's not going to happen. Put that out into the universe. I said, but I had this dream that you got the chord and it was awesome. And he was like, yeah, okay. I'll believe that when it happens. And Mestre Jalón was talking, and I was there, and I'm like, this is my dream. This is my dream.
Throughout my entire capoeira career, I have never gotten a chord away from home. I've been told, you have to travel to Brazil to get this chord, or these chords are only going to be given in New York at this event, the 50th anniversary, et cetera. And I've traveled and gone to all these events and like, okay, maybe it's going to happen today because it didn't happen there or whatever, and all those things. And so this was the furthest thing from my mind. We're in Denver, Colorado at Vampiro's event, and I'm standing on side and I'm kind of chilling. And one of my former students who now trains with Vampiro was becoming Graduada. And so Mestre started talking about her and started talking about San Antonio and the strong foundation that she got there and, the roots of capoeira, et cetera. And so he's going on and on and on about this. And I've been to enough bachasados where I'm like, oh, this talk means that there's another chord about to be.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is my dream. And I was on the viola. And I'm like, this is not happening right now. I'm able to play the viola right now at a bachasada. He's going to get his chord. I start to...
I'm already in the higher elevation. I start to hyperventilate, and I'm looking for anyone to make eye contact with me, and no one would make. Mestrano Cocada's looking that way, Gringo's looking that way. Like no one would make eye contact with me, and I'm like, something is up here. And Skilo pulls a cord out from the bag from behind the. And I like you could have knocked me over with a feather.
It was the prettiest green and purple, the colors were just so. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I was like, and I'm gonna take it. I think I should. That was my doing. I put that onto the universe.
The one thing I wanted to have from that experience, and I told them, I was like, don't post any pictures or videos until I get back to San Antonio, because the one thing about getting a chord away, people see it on social media so quick now, but it used to be, and I remember when Skilo got his green chord, he went to Brazil. And he came back and oh, hey, that's new. And it was such a great surprise, for the group. And so, the same thing. I wanted it to be, I walk into class and there's this reaction. So I go to class that Tuesday. Nobody noticed. There were two people who had seen.
You come in, it's like the one day you got your shirt tucked in, you got the cord out.
There were two people who had seen.
I'm like, I'm gonna record this reaction. It's gonna be the YouTube moment where they put I'm like, this is gonna be awesome. And I'm sitting there, this is gonna be one of those slow motion criers, try not to cry challenge. And I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and nobody noticed, and I was so mad.
Geloso and Espion had seen pictures on Instagram before Vampiro took them down, but nobody else. And I think Salsicha noticed, but he wasn't sure whether he was like everybody else knew, and he was just the last one to notice, so he didn't say anything. And so it took a while for them to be like, hey, that's different, that's new.
Did you change your hair?
Yeah, exactly. Lose weight.
Guys, just to check, how much time? Because I don't want to keep you guys.
No idea what time it is.
I don't even know. What time is it, guys? Y'all know? 12:15.
12:15. Oh, kids class starts at 1.
It starts at 1.
Okay,
so
cool.
Yeah, we got time.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Waiting for everybody to notice, and then it's like, oh, hey guys, look,
Well, and like he's sitting there, he's walking around, and he's doing like the most, like he's a pretty like straight walker, but he's like doing the most like hip shaking, like hey, there's
it reminded me of the moment in Shawshank Redemption when they're like, when do you look at a man's feet? And it's like, well, how often do you look at a man's waist?
Yeah.
Like,
Now, is there? And I vaguely heard a reason for it, but I want to see if it matches up with what I'm thinking is correct. But is there a reason why you guys changed, or when you did, the Mestre Corda to black and Contramestre is brown, right?
Mm.
Kind of matches like a traditional martial art hierarchy of belts.
Mm-hmm. What I was always told was that with Capoeira Brazil, going from white to black is...
So that started with Capoeira Brazil?
With Capoeira Brazil, yeah. The force of colors. And the force of colors, specifically in Capoeira, the black is to commemorate Zumbi, who was said to be as dark as midnight. But with each color, the darker the color, the more the responsibility. And each group has different... symbols, but excuse me. The yellow cord symbolizes gold because the early moments in Capoeira are so precious, like gold. Orange is the rising sun. The red and blue, the red I'm not sure, but orange and blue. Blue is moving into the immensity of the sea, the ocean. Green, which at one point was the first level that you would teach at, is the forest. So it's growth. It's where you're planting seeds and growing. Purple is amethyst, which is an even more rare jewel. Brown is the chameleon, which can adapt. It's about adaptability. The Contramestre is able to adapt and change, and then black, of course, commemorating Zumbi.
Okay. That's really cool. How many cordas do you guys have in your system? Do you know?
Are you counting from children's or? From,
no, just from
adults.
Just adults.
From the adults, let's see. The raw cord, we don't call it white, it's a raw cord.
And you get that first from start.
Yeah, that's a part of your uniform.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you go from there to, and I mean, there are some who don't always give, but white and yellow is the first cord. But it's also a teen cord, so there are some who don't believe kind of in giving the white and yellow. They skip over that. To full yellow, orange, yellow, orange and blue, green and purple, brown and black, and then black.
Okay.
Is the Grand Mestre.
Wow.
So you're looking at within that time probably 30 years of training.
Yeah.
To be a Mestre.
Oh man, you're almost there. 20, right?
Yeah, 20 years. 20 years. So.
That's a long time.
Once you get to the graduated chords, you have to wait at least 2 years before you evaluate it for your next chord.
In between. And then evaluation, how do you guys do y'all do a specific evaluation per, or like how does that work?
It's your year of training.
Okay.
So it's there's not like a test or not a
right.
But it's what you've done all year. It's your consistency, your dedication, commitment to the group, and knowledge, but also the physical component as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I had when we had Mestre Bimba Fogo on, he talked about he does a written exam for his students at the time of the batizado. Man, talk about anxiety. I'm a terrible test taker.
We at Northwest Vista, I have written exams that I would give to the students, but the exams I would tell them, I would always say it's not rocket surgery. It's just what you're supposed to know at that time. And honestly, I felt that they were ahead of the curve. And it's kind of like if you show up every day and you're awake and you're paying attention, you will know at least these things.
Yeah.
And so I had like for each semester, each year, different kind of things for them to pass.
Yeah.
And it was mostly symbolic because I feel the same is true in Capoeira. There are some things that you should know, by a certain level. I remember one year Mestre Accordion was at your event And there were some students who were getting graduated chords, and he's like, here's the berimbau, play this rhythm, or here's the drum, play a baja vento, kind of to test and see where they were.
Yeah, I'd never been so nervous in my life. And it was like, all right, here we go. But I was one of those students at that time.
Well, one thing that we do here is that it is your work throughout the whole year, but Montanha is very open. So we're all each our own measuring sticks. You can't say, okay, well, a yellow chord, you have to be able to do a macaco, because some people's bodies just aren't made for it. So it's one of those things where, it's how much have you journeyed through this year, and how, are you understanding this movement? Because there are some things that I can't do a walkover for my life, and I've been trying for the last 12 years,
There's a difference between proficiency and progress.
Right.
I can have a student who came through the door with 10 years of gymnastics and taekwondo and this and that, and they're a phenomenal athlete. And I can have a student who just got off their couch yesterday, but they worked so much harder and made so much more progress than this other person, and how do you balance the two?
Yeah, sure.
And there are some things that, like, you just kind of have to, if you have, an orange and blue chord, you're going to have to know how to play a berimbau and how to lead a roda.
Yeah.
And there are some, like, hard lines, but most of it, I mean, there's standards, and then there's just sort of like, where are you,
And I think over the years we have raised the bar. I mean, I remember, times where some things were satisfactory in capoeira, and I remember, coming into capoeira, because one of the things that I magnetized to early was the music. And I was like, okay, the movement is going to take me some time to adapt, but I can learn this language and I can learn this music, and because I have an extensive music background. And so before I even owned a uniform, I was singing in the roda, and I was pretty comfortable doing it. And so I've tried to raise the bar with my students that, because I remember times where there were orange chords who didn't sing in the roda or didn't know all the rhythms or didn't, by orange chord, these are the rhythms you have to know. By orange and blue, you need to know all sete toques of Mestre Bimba, and you need to be able to sing to these two. By blue chord, you have to know the difference between, quadra, ladainha, chula, corrido. You have to know the louvação, how to deliver the louvação, all of those things. It's a must. And if I don't see it in application, if we're not in the roda and I don't see you do it, then I have no evidence. I can't give that chord. I'm not operating from rumors,
Yeah.
And in raising the bar, too, it seems like it's a group-wide thing, too, similar to y'all doing the Graduado event. It's like kind of standardizing, raising the bar, making sure everybody's on the same page and learning and everything. Like you making sure that everybody's on top of where they should be, when they should be.
Yeah, at least those things, Because like I said, there are some things that people are going to be challenged with, that are going to be difficult. But anybody can buy a berimbau, which they sell great berimbaus, a Capoeira Connection.
Yeah, shout out.
Plug there. And agogos and atabakis and panderos and, great place, great resource to get it, which in our time, sometimes you had to wait for someone to go to Brazil and come back. It was, resources were scarce. And nowadays, again, and this is another story I can start, you can hop online and find the lyrics to anything you ever wanted to hear and a video of someone singing it, which I had to pester Capoeiristas, for years and years. If I heard a song in the roda, I would go find the person who sang it, get next to him with my little notebook and have them write the words for me. True story, when I first got in Capoeira,
There it is.
Okay.
The book.
Well. Here's the story. I first started capoeira. One of the first people I met was Mestre Carioca, who was a professor at the time. He actually lived in San Antonio, and he was teaching across town from us. And one of the students at the time asked me to give him a ride home. And so I'm giving him a ride home, and he's like, "Hey, stop up here real quick." And I'm like, "Where are we going?" And so he stops by and there's another studio and they're doing capoeira there. And I'm like, what is this? And he said, this is another capoeira school. He's like, they're good. They're just different. And I'm like, okay, are we supposed to be here? Because you watch the old martial arts movies where they, have the conflict between the schools. And the school was Abadá, which Capoeira Brazil and Abadá at that time were not necessarily clicking.
Yeah.
So I go into school with him, and Carioca is very welcoming. Hey, guys. Hey, how you doing? And the first thing he gave me was a little songbook. And I didn't, at that time, have any songs except for the songs I had written. Skilo had written a few songs for me. He gave me a little songbook. I still have it to this day. And from that songbook, I started my own. So I started writing and transcribing songs that I could. And I had a handwritten songbook that I made copies of at work and gave to all of my friends in the class. Was 26 pages long. From there, I started to type... and make a little file. And eventually it got to 130 pages of capoeira songs.
Wow.
And there was a capoeirista who trained under Mestre Boneco, believe it was Tenenchi at the time, who was working on a website with it. And so he asked me to send him, my song lyrics, all the song lyrics I had. And I sent him those song lyrics. And he sent it back to me, all alphabetized, everything, because it was in whatever order I felt like. And also at that time, Microsoft Word didn't have a very complex editor for different languages. And so it had, no accents, no tildes, no anything like that. And when I tried to put it into a file, it did, there were so many errors that ran out of memory.
Square, triangle.
So I sent it to him, and it became actually the base for the capoeirasongs.net or capoeiralyrics.net website. It was kind of my passion at the time. This was going to be what I did, and then someone took it to a completely, another level. So I'm like, great.
Yeah.
It's something for other generations to have. But it started from just writing songs. I remember going to Florida and sitting next to Mestre Caxias and being like, what was that song you sang today? And then Mestre Igor, what was that song?
Yeah, that's a lot of, I think, my takeaway from Messi Fran in Austin during that time was just the music, prowess was incredible. It was just like that. And he has a passion for passing knowledge and stuff to people. So it seemed like he really enjoyed that. We'd go out to eat with him afterwards, and he's like, oh, hey, there's this song and this song. And we're like, dude, I'm just trying to write it phonetically. I don't even know how to spell, just going off of it.
There was a song I remember when he first came down here, and there was a song that I was taking from him, and I already knew the chorus. So I just wanted the verses, and he was singing me the chorus, and he was expecting me, so I was waiting, and so he assumed that I didn't know what he was talking about. So he handed the tablet to at the time Professora Sara, and so she wrote the song for me, and so he thought I had no knowledge of Portuguese. And the next time he saw me, which was maybe a month later, they stayed at my house. And I was speaking Portuguese to him, and I know he was probably thinking wow, this guy this guy learns fast.
Do you remember which song that was?
Yes, it was Chiriria Tucum e Navalha, Jogo de Santa Maria, a manjinga não falha, a manjinga não falha.
Yeah, that's an incredible song, man.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because people will text it, said, hey, you know that La La E song? And he's knows exactly which one he's talking about. He's like, U, B, Shu, Pe, Ga.
Spelled phonetically.
Yeah.
O bicho pega, se vacila, o bicho pega, se vacila, o bicho pega.
It's songs we hear at Bachisalos, and I'm like, hey, what was that song that it sounded like this? And he's like, oh, I got you. Yeah.
So what do you guys have? This is the second year in a row that I've had the pleasure to come down for y'all's end of the year roda. And I think Cadencia, this is probably 3, 4, something like that.
Yeah.
What do you guys have transitioning into the new year? What do you kind of expect January going through?
Well, right now we're preparing for the Carver Youth Matinee, which usually falls in October, but this year, because of some scheduling conflicts, it's in January. And so you'll see us rehearse a little bit after the roda for that. But there's a little bit of space of time. Black History Month is always crazy busy for us. And then we're actually doing, in March, we're doing Congo Square in Austin.
Oh, cool.
For the kids. And so I'm going to bring a group of kids there to do a little hada and perform for that.
Let us know when you come down. I'm sure we'd love to be there.
For sure. And then we're just kind of looking for, whatever events take place after that. Our bachata will be in June, the 19th through the 22nd. So so we have that to look forward to, and a lot of what we do from here forward will just be planning for that.
Yeah.
And then also the Folk Life Festival, of course, is every year in June, but we'll just be condensing what we do for the matinee for that.
Yeah. Very cool.
And what do you see yourself doing over the next several years? I know we've been talking a lot about the past 20, but where do you want to, what do you want to do with your group, with the people? What would you like to see in the next, 3, 5, 10 years?
Growth and growth. When I say growth, again, is not in size but in quality. An issue in every capoeira group is, I'm sure, as you know, retention. And these are things that we try to study. We try to stay ahead of it, and I try to be a student of everything I do. How to keep students, how to keep them motivated, how to, because the only way that someone is going to truly fully reach their potential in capoeira is dedicating the time, and that time is what makes the difference. So those are things that we examine. Of course, the physical plant, we want to continue to improve the studio, put our little touches on it, and Tiffany Sabonecci has done a lot, making this beautiful berimbau case and a pandero holder and the benches that you'll see that we use today for the hada, things like that, woodworking. She has her studio right there. I want to continue to grow the children's program because they really are, the future of capoeira, as much as we try to do and hold on to. When I think of modeling myself after Mestre Jalon, I look at his team. And the really loyal capoeiristas, contra Mestre Esquilo, contra Mestre Borracha, contra Mestre Alegria, Professor Macarrão, they've been with Mestre since they were small children. They have memories of him when they were, Professor Pião. I remember Pião when he was 11 years old. I have a picture somewhere of Pião on my neck, carrying him around in the Pelourinho. But my vision is to cultivate, retain those capoeiristas until they're at a level of understanding where they can eventually take over my work. Because physically, we all decline. I'm not the same guy I was 10 years ago physically, but here I still have a lot to give, and I still have the spirit to train and to play the game because I feel that's what keeps me young. That's what keeps the mind flexible. Capoeira is a game, and I think it's important that we play our whole lives because we learn so much through play. Study psychology, you understand, in the animal kingdom, everything you learn about survival is through play. Yeah. And it's what keeps us young, fresh, and relevant. And so I want to cultivate the kids class. I want to retain with the adults and make it so that it's all kind of one entity, one block, is really my vision for it. I would like to someday be in the position that Mestre is, to be able to travel and see my students work and see what they do and how they, grow their own capoeira over time. Yeah.
And helping them show the sequencia.
Yeah,
I mean, as we get older, it's like you're saying, it's like where your body gives out, but it's like your mind is still sharp and you're still there. Your capoeira is still good. It's just we can't
express it the same way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you still maintain that efficiency, in the game. You can close the game, where the holes are, but maybe not as in flashy of a way as you used to.
Yeah. Man, I want to keep talking, but we have already the kids class going on starting here in the background, and then I guess the Hoda will kick off soon and guests will start arriving.
We'll have a kids class, and there's a little space of time in between there and when the Hoda, so we can prep the instruments and make sure we have the fine china ready for the guests.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was a long-awaited episode. I've been trying to get together with you for a long time to talk. We have a lot more to talk about, so we'll do like a 8.5, 8.2.
All right.
Yeah.
Episode 8.2 with you guys again. But also, thanks again for being our first female presence on the podcast.
And all we did was talk about Montanha.
And that's all we did.
And thanks for knowing that too. That was also I told Ben, I was like, she knew that. That was freaking cool.
Yeah, that was really cool.
We certainly appreciate this. The work that you guys are doing with this podcast is top, excellent. And it's something that's so needed. It's a niche that needed to be filled, and so we really appreciate that.
Thanks, man. We appreciate that too. Cadencia, what else we have?
I just wanted to say thanks for being a part of this and just feeling at home with you guys and coming down here the times that I do. The few times that I get to come down here, I always feel at home, and I really appreciate that from you guys.
The few times. I feel like you're always in San Antonio. You're always here.
Right.
Like, I'm like, who are we inviting? I'm like, well, I was going to be there.
Yeah.
Cadencia is going to be there.
Definitely. I'll be here.
And we're going to we need to make a push for Mestre Jalon on here.
Oh, yeah.
But we need like a 3, 4, 5 hour time slot for that one.
We really do. But you know what? Let's, when we have our next event in June, let's see if we can coordinate.
That would be incredible, man.
Coordinate that. That would be
cool.
Really fantastic.
All right. Well, man, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.